Hi, welcome to Culturally Determined. I'm your host, Aryeh Cohen-Wade, and my guest today is Dan Kaufman, who probably doesn't need an introduction for most of our viewers and listeners, but I'll ask him to introduce himself anyway.
I'm Daniel Kaufman. I'm a professor of philosophy at Missouri State University. I host the Sophia program over on meaningoflife.tv. I publish The Electric Agora, which is an online magazine concerning philosophy and the intersection of philosophy with politics, popular culture, etc. I also happen to be, I have now confirmed this, the most frequent guest on Aryeh's program. He mentioned this last time, and I objected in the comments, and he's confirmed that I am the most...
So some housekeeping, corrections from the previous episode where I was talking to Milton Lawson. I said, I think he is now tied for most with 3 appearances on Culturally Determined. You objected. I went back. We went to the videotape, as Wonderwolf used to say, and you have been on at least 4 times once the program officially launched as Culturally Determined. 1 or 2 times before that. This will be time number 5. Assuming nothing goes horribly wrong, and then I think if you're at 5 and other people are just at 3, I think you're going to hold this title for a long time, kind of like Roger Maris did for a number of years with the single season home run title.
That's right.
So yeah, okay. So our topic today is this meme phrase, cultural idea, cultural trend known as "Okay Boomer." I guess it's been percolating for some period of time, but went mainstream in the past couple of weeks with an article in the New York Times, which we will link to, by Taylor Lorenz, who reports on social media very often. The headline of the piece is, "Okay Boomer marks the end of friendly generational relations. Now it's war. Gen Z has finally snapped over climate change and financial inequality." And so, "Okay Boomer," it seems like at least the origin as portrayed in this piece, with memes, it's hard to say exactly where they start, is this video that went viral on TikTok, which is probably most people have heard of it by now, but it's a video sharing site that's popular among young people, especially teenagers. And it makes it easy to kind of like mash up or remix or take the audio from one video and put it into your own video. And so there's a video of a man who looks to be about 65 years old. He looks a lot like Glenn Beck, and he actually kind of talks like Glenn Beck, but it's not Glenn Beck. It's seemingly just a random person, and he's talking to the camera, and he's kind of telling Gen Z and millennial people to grow up. You'll never accomplish anything with that attitude you have, and so he's giving them a little kind of like lecture or pep talk or something. It doesn't say who this person is, where he came from, why he's doing this. If this video was on TikTok, why would a 65-year-old man be doing a video on TikTok is unclear to me. Maybe it was a video that was on YouTube or something. And then, so some young woman mashed up this video with the guy talking, and she has like a notebook, and she's like scribbling something kind of absentmindedly. And then at the end, the guy's droning on, and she holds it up to the camera, and it just says, "Okay Boomer." So this, at least if it didn't invent this meme, it like kind of popularized it, and it's gone viral since then.
That's not the one that has the really grating techno beat with "Okay Boomer" being repeated over and over and over again on it, is it?
Well, I think that was a remix. That was a remix, I think, of the audio of this 65-year-old man with the goatee. So it's been. Yeah, I think this this app makes it very easy to do those kind of like remix mashup things. And
yeah.
So lots of people were adding their own version of it. And in the article, Lorenz interviews some of the young people who are doing this, and especially focuses on people who have started making merchandise with this on it. Sweatshirts. Yeah, also whatever you want. People setting up online stores and stuff like this. So I think what's this? Article went up, a lot of people in other online spaces started using "Okay Boomer," and maybe even people are using it in real life. There was some example of like a New Zealand legislator, saying it to a older colleague after a speech or something. And yeah, so
even philosophy professors are using it. Kate Mann used it on Facebook, on Twitter, threw it at somebody who she was having an argument with. So it's it's not just teenagers. It's people spanning from teenagers to like almost 40-year-olds
Right.
who are deploying this now. Yeah.
Right.
But it is a Gen Z invention. Is that correct?
That's what it seems like.
Yeah.
And we had an episode maybe a year or so ago where we talked about generational differences and conflicts and kind of Gen X's place, especially compared with millennials. And one of the points I made was that a lot of people are like, the millennials remind us of the boomers in their sense of idealism or something. Where did this come from? And the obvious thing is like, well, the boomers are mostly the parents of the millennials.
Yeah.
So now I think with Gen Z, it's mostly, maybe there are some younger boomers who are parents of Gen Z people who are like maximum age, like 19 or 20 right now, but it's mostly Gen X or possibly even older millennials.
My daughter's 17. Yeah. So, yeah.
So it's interesting that, I guess, one interesting fact is just that the Gen Z seems to have aligned itself with millennials and maybe with Gen X, although we've talked about how Gen X has kind of has an apathetic stance towards politics, against the boomers instead of like, being an apathetic generation or something else. But there's a lot to talk about here. But you responded to this with an essay on the Electric Agora titled "Okay, Boomer." So, do you want anything you want to add to the kind of prefatory material before we talk about your piece?
No, well, only just one thing, and that is that it should be very clear, and I did talk about this in the essay, that the word boomer, as it's being used in OK Boomer, is not supposed to specifically refer to baby boomers. I've been told specifically by multiple people from Gen Z. I even had a discussion in my class, which I talked about in the essay, and it's supposed to simply be any older person. It's even being used against older millennials sometimes. So I've been told that boomer is supposed to indicate a mindset, not a specific generation, though it is a mindset that's associated with older people. So it would be very odd to throw it against a 17 or 20-year-old. But it is being thrown against even older millennials who maybe someone your age, let's say, for a certain kind of attitude or expressing a certain sort of sentiment.
Yeah, so it is in some way similar to the don't trust anyone over 30 thing from did Abby Hoffman say that? I can't remember exactly, but
I don't remember, but it was a 60s.
So that was a boomer thing against
the 60s meme before there were memes, right?
Against the previous generations. But yeah, I think this is both age, generational related, and attitudinal. And, there are people who, it's really, part of it is just against, conservative politics and people who, dismiss climate change or universal Medicare or something like that. And then part of it, we'll get to this kind of related meme that was called a boomer vice or something, advice boomers gave me, is more like a rejection of the kind of traditional tropes about how to succeed in American life that may have been true 50 years ago, and people say they're not true anymore. So we'll discuss that in a little bit. But yeah, it's not. So you can get, someone can call you OK Boomer even if you're Gen X or something else, and maybe even the kids are saying it to each other. I don't know. It's hard to know what's happening within like another generational group if they're not putting it on a video that could go viral.
Yeah. Okay, so the last thing I would say about this very, very quickly is that I don't think it's actually specifically targeted against conservatives. I was told, or at least it seems to me, that it's targeted around a number of specific issues, like you said, climate change, and a few others. Because, I'm seeing all sorts of people who are very demonstrably not conservative having this thrown at them also. And so I think it's more issue related rather than overall political orientation related. At least that's my impression.
Yeah. I could see it being thrown against Joe Biden, a moderate Democrat, or someone like him, but not like Bernie Sanders, even though they're both boomers. Although, who knows? Who knows why people would say this? Okay,
he better watch what he says, or he's going to get it thrown against him. Also, it seems to me.
Okay,
anyway, go on. Yeah.
So you wrote a piece that's, I guess, critiquing this idea, and And you kind of start by talking about kind of a school, like the schoolyard taunt of, I know what you are, but what am I?
I know you are, but I know you. So the OK Boomer, the first time I heard it, immediately reminded me of something that we used to do when we were kids, and that was the I know you are, but what am I? The reason it reminded me of that was because of the way it's deployed, and that is that it's sort of simply like repeated over and over again whenever a person tries to respond to you, right? So it's sort of, and secondly, because so one is the repetition, OK Boomer, OK Boomer, OK Boomer, as sort of a way of annoying the other person so much that they'll simply stop talking with you. And the other thing about it that reminded me of it was that, and this is sort of part of the argument of the paper, was that ultimately it was an expression of a weak, it was an articulation from a weak position, that it was an expression of weakness rather than strength, because the I know what you are, what am I was often deployed against bullies who you couldn't beat up. And back then you were allowed to fight and beat people up. There was not the anti-bullying regime that you have now. And so a lot of times this was sort of the thing that the geeks would say to the big kid who was, insulting them. Mm-hmm. And then you'd say, I know you are, but what am I? And then he would insult you again, and you'd say it again. And then eventually he'd either get so annoyed that he'd sort of wander off, or he'd beat the shit out of you. But it was a way of just sort of like saying, okay, I'm not strong enough to fight you, but I can annoy the shit out of you to the point to which you'll either go away or you'll lose your cool or whatever. So it reminded me of it for both of those reasons. One, that it strikes me ultimately as an expression or articulation of weakness. And secondly, that its intent is to annoy the person to the point to which they'll simply stop talking. That's why it reminded me of that. But I will say that the I know you are, but what am I pretty much ceased being used once you were out of elementary school, whereas I'm seeing OK Boomer being expressed, like I said, by late 30s philosophy professors and people who are not children. And so I think there's something interesting about that as well. So.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with you that it's what people are saying from a position of weakness. I mean, if it's mostly being said by teenagers, they don't have political power. They can't vote. You probably don't have a job. They're relying on their parents. They have this online world in which they're more adept at creating and navigating than their elders. And so they're like taking advantage of that. But yeah, they can't, it's not, in a like head to head fight or something. It's probably, the 15-year-old probably isn't going to beat the 55-year-old in whatever area, because the 55-year-old has more power. So right. I agree with that. And I think it's also, I think I don't know if this is a disagreement with your piece. I think like this is just a new phrasing of things that could have been said for 100 years, which are like up yours or fuck you or talk to the hand. That was one when I was like in middle school. Talk to the hand. I don't know if kids say that anymore. Or get lost. These are a lot of are just like two words, and they all essentially mean the same thing, which is like fuck off, get out. I don't want to hear from you. Get out of here. I don't care what you say. I mean, that's a teenager's kind of thing. Is I don't care what you say. I'm going to do my own thing. And I think that it's just that a lot of politics, it's become clear in recent years that a lot of like politics is breaking down along generational lines between young people who fear the future of climate change and older people who will be dead if the effects of climate change come to pass. So they don't have to care about it for their own personal material well-being, or Medicare for all, young people who want universal health insurance fighting with old people who already have universal government health insurance. They're trying to just get what the elderly people already have. Or, look at Donald Trump, a classic baby boomer who only cares about himself and watches cable TV all day long and is very emotional and blah, blah, blah. So I think like, and also the fact that the top three contenders in the Democratic primary are all over 70. This is weird. And like, are we ever going to be rid of these people? The baby boomers going to be with us forever. They're going to have like the kind of like life extension and, plugging their brains into computers or something. So that they simply won't die.
We did have, look, I mean, we did have 2 terms of Barack Obama. And I really, listen, the funny thing is that, I've gotten a crap load of flack for this piece. And I think maybe part of the problem is that the view I was trying to express is actually not that easy to articulate, because it's difficult to express a view that is simultaneously sympathetic and critical, which is what I was trying to do. But I more than anyone was hoping that Barack Obama signaled the end of our gerontocracy. I really did. And I was very disappointed. I mean, obviously, I did not vote for Donald Trump. And although the other choice was also old, who I did vote for, and I wouldn't vote for a third party because it seemed to me to just be voting for the other guy. And I'm very disappointed by the way the Democratic races has shaken out, in part because it looks again like we're going to have another gerontocracy come the next election. So, I mean, I agree with all that. I mean, something you said, though, it does strike me, and that is that in the past, these kinds of dismissive fuck-offs, and I know you ours, but what am I, and whatever they are, were typically employed in the personal sphere, right? And so, it was sort of like, they weren't deployed sort of politically, right? The baby boomers, the real ones, were obviously very heavily involved politically in the issues of their day, mainly the Vietnam War and then the Civil Rights Movement and the women's movement. It was certainly a generational conflict and struggle, right? But they did understand that to accomplish those things, you actually need to win elections, right? And that in a democracy, to win elections, you actually have to persuade people, and you have to sort of muster up a actual power, right? Actual muscle, which comes in the form of both money and then influence, right? And what I guess bothers me, part of what bothers me is that these kinds of memes are sort of being deployed not in the personal sphere, but in the political sphere. And that's why, in my view, they're ultimately the ultimate expression of impotence on the part of the young, right? They're a display of non-power. Now, you're right that the young don't have power intrinsically because they don't have money and they don't have influence, but that is the challenge, right? And what the 60s generation did was they rose to that challenge, and they were able to create mass movements around young values, so to speak. And I don't see that happening today, and it's part of what bothers me. It's partly because the OK Boomer seems to be an expression of impotence and a failure to recognize that snarky memes are not going to ever win you any elections or anything that's going to get you the things that you claim that you're so upset about, right? I mean, that's what sort of bothers me about it. Anyway, I went on too long. Please go ahead.
Build the wall, lock her up, MAGA. These are all snarky memes, and there's more than that, obviously, but not much more, really. But that's
not what won him the election. Do you think? Is it? I mean, that's.
Well, I mean, I think that's snappy branding and simple ideas helped win him the election, and his false persona as a business genius. Which is related back to branding, maybe the one thing he's actually good at. So I would say, the personal versus political, you probably wouldn't say up yours to, a political opponent.
Nixon, you don't if you're trying to defeat Nixon, right, or get America to pull out of the Vietnam War, you don't just say "Okay, Boomer" to people or dismiss them with snarky. You have to actually go out and create a political coalition that's going to win elections, right?
Right. So I mean, part of it is that. This is obvious, but the internet makes the personal and the political meld together. So that whoever this 16-year-old girl who made the first meme where she's writing in the notebook and holds it up and says, "Okay, Boomer," maybe she just made this to send to her friends because she thought it was funny and it went viral, and suddenly millions of people can see it when that wasn't the original intention. So it seems like it didn't used to be that you could like do politics from, sitting on your toilet or something. Whereas now, if you're on your phone and tweeting at people, you're at least there's a simulacrum of participating in the political system, even if you're not really doing anything. Whereas before you had to like go out into the streets or call someone on the telephone to get these things done. But I mean, there is, like young people are not just making memes and selling T-shirts. Like, there's the March for Our Lives movement started by the students in Parkland, Florida, against gun violence, and there is the climate movement that this young woman, Greta Thunberg, whatever her name is the face of. That she has certainly turned herself into a full-time activist, and she's like 15 or 16 years old, and she's getting incredible blowback and like death threats from because of it. So she is not just making TikTok videos. Like, she's actually doing shit. I mean, she like sailed a boat across the Atlantic, solar powered or something, to show that like you didn't need massive like carbon polluting energy to travel, or something along these lines. So I think like some of the kids are engaging in the type of politics that the 60s generation did as well. But, not that's, we can lionize the activism of the 60s, but probably what percentage of young people actually participated in political protests? Like, it was probably less than 20% or something. Most people are just kind of apolitical, apathetic, don't pay attention to this stuff. Yeah. Maybe with the Vietnam War draft, that was more salient during that time. There's nothing like that now. So
nothing like the prospect of getting shipped off to fight in some wretched jungle for no damn good reason to get you sort of stoked, right? I mean,
exactly.
I know. That's absolutely right. And look, listen, I mean, all these conversations are sort of generalizations. I mean, we're talking about a lot of people, right? I mean, look, there's a reason why they called it the silent majority back then, and I'm sure it included plenty of people of that age, right? I mean, they weren't all even on the side of the activists. So I don't want to ever pretend that we're not generalizing. And you're certainly correct. I mean, listen, there are concerns I have about the Greta Thunberg phenomenon. They're not relevant to this. Certainly that is an example of actual potent youthful activism, as is the Parkland thing, which I think with this thing with the lawsuit with Remington, the lawsuit against Remington being able to go on is I think a watershed moment, and maybe the thing that finally stops some of these mass shootings. Mm-hmm. Because if people stop manufacturing these weapons, then it's going to be a lot harder to shoot 30 people in 5 minutes. Listen, all of those things are great, and I'm for them in principle. I guess part of what the OK Boomer thing is so meaningless in the large scope of things. To me, it's more like a symptom, right? I am concerned that too many young people think too much that online activism has far more efficacy and potency than it actually does, and they're far too enthralled to the technology and the devices and the virtual space. Mm-hmm. That really is my concern. It's not that there's no real activism going on, or that of course there is, but this new technology and this new sort of ecosphere that was created, I do think has tempted and seduced and distracted too many young people too much. I guess that's sort of, and to giving the illusion of potency and to me, of the OK Boomer meme, I mean, one of the things that struck me immediately was the aesthetics of it. That the impression that you get from the people doing it is that they've landed some sick burn on you, right? And at the same time, it's such a clear articulation of weakness that it just kind of, who is the joke on, really? Like, I mean, OK Boomer, you could almost reinterpret as a sort of a just cry of despair rather than the sick burn that they're sort of. It's got a lot of false bravado to it. It seems to me that comes from being misled into thinking that this online ecosphere is more potent than it is, and also. That they're somehow doing something by employing the platforms of all of these mega corporations that are probably half the ones that are responsible for half the things they're unhappy with. So I don't want to deny that there's real activism. It's more that this new environment worries me, and its capture of young people's imagination worries me.
Yeah, I mean, the final part of your essay is a kind of Marxist critique in some ways of what's happening, of the people thinking that they're using their Apple brand iPhone and their Twitter brand tweets, and every time you tweet, you're like somehow marginally increasing the value of Twitter.com, this very poorly run tech company that has probably made the world a worse place. And
you and I are both on.
yeah, I'll admit it. And also, as soon as this became, maybe it used to take a couple months if something happened before the T-shirts started getting made because supply chain issues and stuff like that. Whereas now you can immediately there are kids making graphic designs and monetizing this and selling T-shirts for it, and so that's capitalism for you. That it becomes there's that old saying about starts as a movement and ends as a racket, and that happens simultaneously now. That as soon as anything starts, there are people trying to make money off of it by selling crap, and the crap is probably made by sweatshop workers in Indonesia. So none of those things are super laudable. But I mean, I think it depends whether things move from the online space to the real world space. You can the thing can go viral and get a million hits of making fun of this Glenn Beck knockoff guy. But no one knows who he is. No one knows who the young woman is who made it, and nothing. No real change has been affected by that. Whereas if I don't know if people's minds are changed or they are suddenly galvanized with this idea that there's a generational / class division in the country between the old people who have all the money and resources and power and the young people who all they have is a smartphone. Maybe they'll fight to redistribute some of those resources and money and power away from the old people. So.
Let me just say one more thing, because I'm sure you want to get onto the Times piece and some of the other stuff you wanted to talk about. But just since you raised this question of the sort of the quasi-Marxist sort of critique at the end of the essay, I just want to say one more thing about this, and that is that it's one thing if online activism creates an actual genuine groundswell of a movement, right? Okay, so let's say if sociologists later on do an analysis of where the anti-assault rifle activism on the part of young people came from, and it turns out that it goes back to Parkland victims and stuff, employing social media to sort of generate sympathy and get things going. That's one thing. But a lot of times I think that the people are under the impression that the online activism is effective because the causes are taken up by quote unquote woke corporations. And I'm very, very cynical about our current woke capitalism. I think it's entirely cynical. And the minute that these corporations no longer think that wokeness is in their financial interest, they'll drop it like a hot rock. In other words, these are not reliable or genuine partners in any real cause. They are just simply exploiting what they see as a current way of making money. And so, I've in the past talked about, people might say I'm sort of being contradictory. On the one hand, I'm saying that, this internet call-out culture, it's destroying everybody, it's wrecking the world and all this sort of stuff. And now you're saying it has no efficacy at all. And I guess in a sense what I'm saying is that it can have a kind of ersatz efficacy in that a lot of big-time capitalists will pick it up and run with it and use it to brand Nikes and to brand all sorts of things and to have, trans flags flying on top of the Google building and all of that. And that can do quite a lot in the short term, but don't think that actually in the long term actually is going to translate into any real political action or change, because we have to be very clear about what these organs are doing this for and what they exist for, and that is to make money, right? And I worry a little bit that that people think they've won the culture war because they've captured the institutions. And then they get a big rude shock when they wake up the next day and Donald Trump was elected president, because in fact they hadn't really won the culture war. They'd simply captured some institutions that have a prominent voice in the public space. And in that sense, it is very reminiscent of Nixon winning and defeating McGovern, and liberals reacting with shock and saying things like, "How can that have happened? I don't know anybody that voted for him." Right, and so I do worry that the kind of influence that comes out of social media activism often is illusory. It is an influence on institutions that cynically employ it to make money. I don't know how you feel about that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree.
I have to say on that. Yeah,
I agree with the cynical take on any sort of corporation aligning itself with progressive or woke values in order to make money. If they started realizing that it was losing them money, 99% of them would dump the political ideology. They exist to make money. I mean, this is the standard like socialist critique. But I think I brought this up in maybe the previous time we had a discussion about generations. Is like, I think what is kind of different is like the movement, that the anti-gun movement that the Parkland students started was like they started it. It wasn't like the adults started and they joined, and the technology enabled that. And there was also some sort of generational change, because when like I was in high school when Columbine happened. And I don't think like anyone in my high school thought that like we could be the ones who would like somehow form a political movement or something. Like we were just, teenagers. We didn't have any power, and we watched like MTV News and stuff. So there was no way that we could like organize on like any like scale beyond just the school or get media attention. That we didn't know how to do that.
Because you were? Let me ask you though. Was that because you were relatively ignorant of recent history? In other words, I'm starting to wonder whether part of the problem is that our students just don't know the history of the country since the Second World War and don't actually know how effective youth activism has been on the ground.
Well, I mean, I think we probably were at age 15 or 16.
Know about the anti-Vietnam protest?
Yeah, I mean, well, like we would have been. I think we would have known it just because it was in the air. I don't know if we would have like been taught specifically about it in school. Like kind of. Like U.S. history classes would maybe end before then, like end with World War II or something. But like I think a lot of people had like family connections. Like my parents actually met in the anti-war movement in college at the University of Maryland.
So why would you think that after Columbine you wouldn't be able to have the efficacy to do something?
I mean, it just seemed like this is a problem for the adults to solve. And what can we do? We're just kids. I mean, maybe if we had been maybe the anti-war movement was largely college students. I don't know how much it was high school students. You get drafted.
It was mostly it was a college phenomenon. Yes.
So that's a different. You're not living at home anymore, and you can work with the professors and stuff. So that's part of it. But yeah, I think it just would have been like, this we're just kids. Like this is not a problem that we can weigh in on in any real way. So that does seem different. That the students immediately like mobilized on their own and became, like national figures. And, I don't know if they're ever going to succeed because the gun lobby is so powerful and there's already like 350 million guns in the country already. And they're making more every day. So, that's why
I think this lawsuit is so important, because money, man. If there's going to be a huge cost to this, these gun manufacturers are simply going to stop making these things. They're just going to stop making them. So you'll have to get them from overseas. You'll have to get them, and I really do think this is watershed, actually. If this actually works and Remington eats a gigantic sum of money and stops making these weapons, I think that this will be an example of youth activism that really was potent, right? I mean, that really, I'll be very happy. I mean, I'm quite strict on guns, as people will know from other dialogues I've done. So I mean, I hope it works. But I just don't want people to think that just because you've gone into the online ecosphere and now Google's flying rainbow flags that you've won something, right? I mean that. You you've won something when you win elections, right? You've won something when you get Remington to stop making whatever assault rifles they make, right? And I'm worried that just a lot of young people are distracted and misled and maybe a little bit seduced by these companies into thinking, oh yeah, you've won, right? You've won, right? Here,
Yeah.
look at our rainbow flag,
Yeah, I mean, so there's just on like the broader left, there's kind of the like quote unquote woke people, but then there's the socialist people, and I think the socialist people see through the woke capitalism, for what it actually is, and are not not pacified by the fact that General Motors is flying a trans flag or whatever, because they like have a deep critique of capital that goes beyond that. So, and a lot of the socialist people are highly critical of the woke people for creating kind of like a distracting area of politics when it's a when class is the real divide in politics, and that's where the battles have to be waged. Okay, let's just mention briefly this article that I just saw today.
Here are the other things you wanted to talk about. You wanted to talk about the New York Times and also about this thing about advice. Generational advice.
Right. Oh, okay. So this is this was actually Newsweek, and this was just briefly noted. An AARP executive responded to the OK Boomer meme by saying to millennials, quote, "We actually have the money." And we can link to this article. But it's just like, I mean, like, and this is a woman who's like a media, PR person at AARP. It's like, yeah, that's the point, lady. Like, yeah, you have the money, and the kids, kids don't have any money or any power, and you continue to exert power culturally and politically because you have economic power, and the kids want to change that. So I don't think that woman quite gets it. But let's so the other thing which is related, I think kind of more interesting is this. A meme that started on Twitter last week, and it was started by just I guess a regular person, not a famous person, whose Twitter handle is Free Your Mind Kid, and he or she, I think it's a he, wrote, "What's the most out of touch advice that a boomer has ever given you? Use the hashtag Boomer Advice when you answer." And so this went viral enough that
boomer here also is intended in this broader sense, right? Not just the 60s generation. I
think so. I mean, basically, it seems like what's like advice your parents gave you is essentially, it seems more or less the same. And this had enough play that Twitter made one of its like moments thing about it. That's how I saw it. So I'm just going to read some of the ones that they collated from various people on Twitter. Quote, "You can't just apply for jobs online. You have to get out there, drop off resumes, call them every day, go pound the pavement. Pay your dues, work late, go the extra mile, take the initiative, take all the tasks no one else wants you to do. Your boss will give you credit and you'll be promoted quickly. It's the way to get ahead. Hashtag Boomer Advice. If you show you're willing to work harder, they will show that they are willing to pay you more. Go to college, get a good job, be loyal to the company, they'll be loyal to you." And then inserted the skeptical frowny emoji after that. "You'll get more conservative as you get older and start to understand how the world actually works. Literally the opposite. I was a Texas libertarian in my teens, and now the way the world works has made me a goddamn borderline tanky." And tankies are like, the extreme, like, militarist version of the left who, support like a communist revolution. And you'll see things differently once you have children. Hashtag Boomer Advice. And then in parentheses, "and no, I'm still just as radical." So I thought this is, it plays on similar themes of generational divide and, actually some, like, I've heard some of this advice myself, pound the pavement and, leave resumes and stuff. And it's a symbol that, like, really there's an old sort of story that people told themselves about how to get ahead in America of, working hard and, wearing a tie to work and, doing what your boss expected you to do, and you would get promotions and, work hard, get ahead. That's the American dream. And that seems to have broken down in the lives of a lot of younger people, where, they work hard and they get laid off, or they work hard and their salary gets reduced, or they can't get that first job and they can't afford to pay for college. And just that the older people are still existing in this world where, your boss will reward you for being loyal to the company. Like, does your boss really give a shit about you at all? And why would you be loyal to an abstraction known as a corporation that will lay you off if that's what's in the profit motive? So I thought this was interesting, and just also shows that how big the generational divide is and how much has changed in the economy, in the past 30 or 40 years. So what did you think of this?
Well, first of all, what I was going to say was that what strikes me is that I only think about half of the things you read are actually bad advice. The other half, I think, are actually quite good advice.
Mm-hmm. So what's one that you would agree with?
Well, so for example, it really is the case, and I've told my daughter this, and she's discovered it by doing it, that it really is the case that just as a general matter, you will get more of what you want and be more effective when you deal with people actually in person. Whether it's trying to get something from a bureaucratic office in the university, students of mine are wrestling with the financial aid office or whatever, and they're doing everything through online communication. And I tell them, go to the office and stand in front of the person and talk to them. And it really does make an enormous difference. People simply react to you differently, probably because people react emotionally when they can see the expression on your face, when they can see visible distress. It still is the case that most people are basically decent. I find most ordinary people in day-to-day life, and so I think that that's simply true.
An email or an electronic submission is easier to put aside than a person who's standing in front of you who's you have to get them to leave somehow, and solving a problem is one way to do it.
It's easier to respond to in a callous way than a person who's standing in front of you whose face you can see and the expressions on whose face you can see. I also have to say, in terms of the sort of the job world and the expectations, one of the things that I've read a lot about that seems kind of remarkable is that an entire industry of consulting firms has come into existence to consult and advise companies on how the hell to deal with young employees who are running to HR every 5 seconds with every complaint that they have about everything that's going on in their company. There just is a sense of a kind of refusal to endure the experience at the lower ranks of employment that every generation prior has endured and has known about and simply understood has to be endured before one gets to the position in which one can make all sorts of demands and have all sorts of expectations and the like. And so I also do think that there's a general wisdom to when you're just starting out and you're at the bottom, shut the fuck up, do your goddamn job, don't complain, and suck it up. I mean, I do think that that's very good advice because especially in a job market where jobs are scarce, that you could be replaced very easily. And if all you're doing is beating down the door of the HR officer, you're going to get replaced. There's also this weird expectation. I mean, I saw something, I forget where it was. I was involved in some conversation, and the person was just sort of outraged that we didn't realize that, today a young person can't afford to live in Manhattan. And I thought to myself, well, who says you have a right to live in the most expensive, highest market area in the country? You might have to go live in Ohio, buddy, right? And again, that's something everybody knew, right, until about 5 minutes ago, and nobody really was so outraged about it. Simply was the reality that you can't live in high market areas until you're substantially advanced down the road, and some people never get to live in high market areas. That's why there are people living in Ohio and Indiana and where I live in Missouri. I mean, why the hell do you think I live in Missouri? You think I live in Missouri because I want to? I can't afford to live in Manhattan. Or I can't even afford to live in the neighborhood I grew up in. Now, my parents are extraordinarily wealthy, but they're still alive. And they're not giving me all their money. And so I do find a lot of the complaints and a lot of the hand-wringing to indicate a rather lack of self-awareness and lack of awareness of what, I mean, there's no question the economy was much wider open for the baby boomers than it is for the current generation. But it's not wider open than it was for the Depression era generation. It's much better than it was for the Depression era generation. And I do think that there's a lot of unhinged expectations and too much by way of dismissing the advice of people, many of whom actually came up in much, much harder times.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's my sort of answer. I think half the time they're right. But the other half of the time, I do think that it reflects a kind of lack of perspective and a lack of real. Yeah, these older people, some of whom went through much harder times than you, knows how to make it through, right? I mean, and perhaps should be listened to.
Yeah, I think it's. I agree with some of what you're saying, and I haven't had a normal career in the job market, so maybe I'm not the best person to give personal testimonies. But I think there's a sense among young people that we were sold a bill of goods and a lot of it was bullshit. And this, especially because the happened after the financial crisis. And that has led to radicalization among some people moving far to the left or maybe far to the right. Seeking a radical change in the system to improve it somehow. I don't know. I mean, some sort of massive system-wide change in the way business and the workplace works seems unlikely to happen. Just small changes would happen around the edges, and then as the boomers retire and younger people naturally gain more power. Maybe they're not so young anymore once they gain power, but different generations gain power through natural attrition. Maybe some things will change, or maybe we'll see that no matter what your good intentions are, there's just material facts about modern workplaces that means they create various ills, and you would need some sort of massive change to do that, and then the massive change will never happen because it's just too hard to actually pull off. But I think what is interesting to me is that the generational divide and this idea that there's a war between the generations and the younger one is siding. The younger ones are sticking together, Gen X somewhere in the middle, but everyone is saying, okay, the boomers are the shitty ones, and they're giving us this nonsense advice, and they're the ones we need to go after. I mean, it's interesting, and then I wonder what a orthodox Marxist would be saying about this, because I assume the boomers are the wealthiest generation, but also there's plenty of people in younger generations who hold economic power, and if Instagram decides that they're siding against the boomers or something like that, Instagram is owned by Facebook, created by Mark Zuckerberg, millennial, and that's a massive corporation that has had in my opinion, a bad effect on America and the world. So I wonder if it's somewhat of a false consciousness to say we're all teaming up against the boomers when there's Silicon Valley continues to always attract young people, and there are very powerful people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s there, and other people who have generational wealth or something. That it's not just we need to defeat the boomers. That's false consciousness. We need to power capital instead. So I would be. I don't know. I don't know if anyone has Jacobin or something has written about this.
But the extent to which it seems to me that the vagueness of what boomer is supposed to refer to is kind of doing the work. I have no doubt that a lot of these people would say, "Okay, boomer" to Zuckerberg, right? I mean, but let me ask you. I mean, just because I did raise this, and I'm curious what you think of it. Do you not think that young people today have a kind of sense of expectation that's rather out of whack. And the reason I'm at, it was like the thing I said about, I'm outraged that I can't afford, I'm 20 years old and I can't afford to live in Manhattan. Well, I'm 50 years old and I can't afford to live in Manhattan. And I guess what I'm guessing and what I'd love to see some data on, I suspect if you interviewed young new immigrants, especially from developing countries, they would not have this attitude. In other words, I'm wondering to what extent this is a middle class phenomenon. Because I'm thinking about it, whatever the downsides of the economy might be, and there's certainly many, there was a major crash when I was coming out in 87 and 88. And that scared us and worried us about our job prospects. I mean, the whole Gen X original thing was that we were the slacker generation, and that this was partly because our job prospects were so dim as opposed to the previous generation. Certainly, if you grew up during the Depression, your prospects were even much dimmer. My parents are immigrants and came out of not only totalitarianism in Europe, but war and genocide. Came to the country not knowing the language. You have people from very poor developing nations coming here now that are who's young, with young people, with children and teenagers who are working their asses off, and none of them ever spoke this way. And I guess I do think that the young generation is earning some of its entitlement characterizations, right? I guess I feel that they do kind of deserve it to a certain degree, because it seems like an awful lot of them are white middle class kids. Whose main concern is that they can't afford to live in Manhattan, or that that they've got college loans. My father wished he had a college loan when he was fighting against 4 Arab armies in 1948. Right? I mean, you know what I'm saying? I mean, there's something a bit. We can be realistic and recognize the difficulties, the downturns of the economy, and all of that. But there's a kind of an apocalypticism that makes it seem kind of ridiculous, don't you think?
Well, okay, so you encounter many more young people as a college professor than I do, who essentially encounters zero in real life, and sometimes I see their antics on social media. So you know them better than I do. I'll say that when you see things that, like, if something goes viral on social media or something, like, it's captures some extraordinary emotion and is not like, I don't know, there's something like different about it. And it's not the average person's experience or something, like, the average person is not like tweeting things going viral constantly. I mean, I'm wary of thinking like, like people have been saying kids these days, since
forever, forever,
Greco-Roman times or whatever, biblical times. And the complaint that like the kids today don't measure up to, the previous generations, seems as old as time. So I take that with a grain of salt. I don't know. I mean, like, maybe there are probably kids complaining, like people who are 22 complaining they can't live in Manhattan. There are probably more people who are 22 saying, I would never fucking want to live in Manhattan with all the fucking rich people who are destroying our economy and ruining our planet. And they'll go live like in the South Bronx or something in a $350 apartment that they can afford. So I don't know. I guess I can't render a judgment on that. I think the technology is. I don't think there's been some fundamental attitudinal change. I think it's probably the technology is enabling us to see the written thoughts or occasionally the actions, like when some wacky thing happens on a college campus of young people in a way we couldn't 20 years ago. And
yeah, you're right.
Yeah, I mean, I did an episode with Robbie Soave, who wrote this book about, I think it was called Panic Attack, about like far left college activists, and we kind of debated this, and I was saying, this famous thing that happened at Yale where this student was yelling at the residential college master and saying you're about Halloween costumes, if this has happened 20 years ago, it wouldn't have gotten in the Yale Daily News. It would have been forgotten instantly because it wouldn't have been recorded by anyone.
No one would have known about it outside the Yale community. You're absolutely right.
So maybe there's been some change in the political orientation of young people, but also it's just like anything where it happens, anyone can record it and upload it to YouTube instantly. It can go viral, and then that clip can be embedded in the websites of that have various ideological access to grind and et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I don't know. it's a mess.
No, I agree. It's very difficult. It's so easy. I mean, I just said earlier to not think that to not be too impressed by accomplishing sort of something on in the virtual ecosphere, and it's at the same time so easy to think that because something's happened in the virtual ecosphere, it's a big deal, right? So I'm guilty of it myself. I gotta tell you, Ari, I'm almost starting to wonder whether we really, really, really underestimated just how distorting this ecosphere that we've created would be with respect to our even ability to figure out what the hell is going on in the country, right? I mean, I'm wondering whether the need for really good social science now is even 100 times more imperative than it was before, because our perception is so muddled by this ecosphere we've created. I don't even trust myself anymore to be able to see clearly what the hell's going on because of this. And I can't imagine with people who don't spend all their time thinking for a living, right, who have to work, how the hell they could figure out what's going on.
Yeah, I think I agree with that, and I think video recorded by cell phones and uploaded to YouTube is something that's like, I mean, think about all the theorizing that went along with like the first 50 years of television and like understanding how it affects people, whereas like all the filtering that had to happen for something to appear on television versus it's essentially one person deciding that this is the thing they're capturing, and then it goes on YouTube and can go viral. Like the obvious example is the stupid thing that happened with these kids from Covington High School when they were in Washington D.C. This total non-event that was not worth commenting on in any way whatsoever. It became like a multi-week culture war thing just because there was video. If there's no video, that wouldn't have existed. So I mean, there's something about the power of video that we're still like grappling with. And
the combination of video and distribution, right? Mm-hmm. Because I think that the impact of video itself, I think we have pretty digested in a pretty sophisticated way. I mean, I guess what I'm saying is we're still waiting for our Marshall McLuhan for the internet, right? I mean, I think that we understand the effect of the camera eye. I don't think we understand the effect of the combination of it with the kind of ubiquitous instantaneous distribution. Mm-hmm. And that's the aspect of it that makes it so distorting. It's not just that the image is distorting, but the speed and the you know what I'm saying is I almost feel like we don't still understand it yet. We're still waiting for the Marshall McLuhan of this era, and we don't really yet have it unless you're more aware probably of the literature or what's going on about. You seem to pay more attention to the sort of the online world than I do.
I don't know if anyone has made sense of it. I mean, the person who comes to mind is more someone who writes about the internet as a whole. And this guy, what is his name? Jared Lanier, who he is attributed as creating the term virtual reality and has been.
Oh, the guy with the
he has a long dreadlocks.
Hasn't he turned? He's become very negative about the ecosphere, hasn't he? I mean,
yeah.
Hasn't he outright advocated against removing it from school, from education, and from schooling? And
it's possible. I know he wrote a book that was like, delete all your apps now or something like that. And he also had this recent video essay in the New York Times that I actually was interesting, but I saw almost no reaction to whatsoever for whatever reason. That was about imagining a change in the ecosystem where your personal data would belong to you, and if a company like an advertiser wanted access to it, like they would have to pay you to get that, and so money would like instead of like clickbait articles like getting money, the money would go would go straight to like regular people who were consensually giving their personal data away to advertisers. So the link to that article will be below. So yeah, I mean, there's people thinking about this, but yeah, it's moving so quickly. You know, YouTube only started in 2005. I mean, things go viral basically these days on Twitter and Facebook, which are also started, you know, in the past 15 years. So yeah, we're still figuring it out, and I don't know if we'll destroy the planet or blow ourselves up or something because of it. I mean, I think one thing that is interesting, just vaguely related, is that I think there were a lot of fears that like Trump was going to tweet something and that would cause World War III, when he said the tweet where he tweeted about fire and fury, North Korea, I guess, was maybe the closest thing to that. But I think we've just been so inured to his nonsense that if he tweets something now that's outrageous, people are just like, ugh, you know, this again. And so I think everyone, you know, the world powers know that he is like a paper tiger and a buffoon. And I think the media has realized, like, yeah, we don't need to breathlessly report on everything that he tweets out because he's just a moron. So at least that, I think we don't have to worry about nuclear war sparked by a tweet anymore. But tribalism and us versus them style that Twitter encourages is definitely bad, bad overall for humanity.
Yeah, but I mean that is the inherent weakness, I guess. The one Achilles heel of the instantaneousness and the ubiquity of it is that people get immunized to it really fast, right? I mean, so Trump's capacity to outrage, at this point, the outrage is almost, it seems to me, entirely performative, because at this point, it's just like the ranting guy on the corner, right? I mean, after a while, you don't even hear him anymore. You certainly don't take him seriously. Now, in Trump's case, you know, he's in power, so you have to take it seriously. But I think that most of the outrage reaction to Trump now is, for the most part, either performative or because simply people have become immunized to it.
Yes, I agree
and maybe that will happen with some of the other things as well. We just don't know yet, but I am very well aware of the distorting effect that it seems to have on people's perception of what's going on, including my own. I'll find myself reacting to things and say, wait a minute. Is anything actually happening? Or is this just people screaming on online? And I almost wish I didn't have to use the platforms, because I do for the, you know, I'm trying to create my own platform in order to sort of, you know, present ideas and stuff without having to go through a lot of mediating institutions. And so I need to use things like Twitter and stuff like that. But I kind of wish I didn't have to, because it's definitely affecting my perception as well of what's going on. And I sometimes have to be reminded, oh, wait, you're the guy who's supposed to be saying that we shouldn't be paying attention to that stuff so much. And here you are reacting to, okay, boomer. I mean, fair enough, you know. But it was interesting, Arya, that I did bring it into my classroom. I wanted to actually talk to actual young people. And it was, I got to tell you, and this is maybe, I'm sure we want to wind down, but this is something that also struck me about it. You know, Gen Xers, you know, when I was their age, we had plenty of fuck off kind of sort of things of our own towards our elders, but we kind of expected them to not accept it, right? In other words, we weren't so brittle when the response was negative, and I was a little shocked at just how brittle my students were when I even pushed back just a little bit against the meme. I mean, it was almost like a tearful reaction, right? It was almost like, we want to have our sick burn, and if you don't slink off and look like we burned you, you actually stand up and say, well, go fuck yourself back. We're just going to fall apart, right? I mean, it was a very odd exchange. I was like, wait a minute. Either you're in the sick burn business, in which case you have to sort of realize that the person who you think you burned so badly might not think so, and might even swing back at you, right? It's almost like they want to take the piss, but when they get pissed on back, they fall apart, right? I mean, I actually had one student almost looked like they were going to burst into tears just at me pushing back. against this meme and saying, just some of the things that we've discussed here.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know. I don't know. I just that was a ramble, but
yeah, that is surprising. And what you wrote about that in the essay reminded me of something said recently by John McWhorter and Glenn Lowry about their students not wanting to debate controversial topics in class or for fear of offending people. And yeah, I do. I'm skeptical. A lot of these, the young kids are, crazy stories, but that did seem to be maybe there is something there. And you can say the students maybe all this stuff about bullying or whatever they've been taught don't hurt other people's feelings. That's really bad. Or it could be the technology part. If you're 30 years ago, if you were in a classroom, a lecture class, and you answered a question and said something really stupid by accident, and the worst thing that would happen was the people in the room thought you were stupid. Today the worst thing that could happen is someone secretly recording you and they put it on Twitter and it goes viral.
20 million people think you're stupid.
And then
now.
Millions of people are laughing at you. So I wonder if that could be a part of it. That people are like, why? What's the point of taking a risk if any moment can go viral?
I guess what we didn't. Part of the form that our rebelliousness took was that we did not expect the people at whom it was targeted to accept it. And it seems to me that now they do. One of the things that struck me, one of the things that I said to the students was, they said the OK Boomer meme is being deployed against old people who are not listening to their arguments, right? Especially about climate and about LGBT and certain other hot things that are very important to them. And I asked very, very earnestly, not nastily, I asked, how would you distinguish someone who's not listening to your arguments from someone who doesn't find your arguments persuasive? And my asking this visibly upset the people who were defending the meme. And then I said, please tell me if I'm wrong. I said, but I'm not really under the impression that you're really very interested in having a discussion about these things. You just want us to accept your view on it, right? In other words, there seems to be this sort of an expectation that we're going to make these arguments, and because we're so sure of our rightness, everybody else is just going to accept them. There seems to not be any sense of which there's a need to actually persuade people, and that you might not succeed, right? I don't know if you have any feelings about this, but I'm not really under the impression that they want to have much of a discussion. And when you ask them, things like how would you distinguish a person who's not listening to your arguments from someone who disagrees with them, they get visibly sort of upset. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you have feelings about this sort of dynamic or if you think I'm wrong about this.
Well, like I said, you have real life encounters with young people that I don't. I mean, I'm reminded of the impetus for the meme, the video of the man with white hair. What is he doing? He's for whatever reason, he's delivering a monologue into the camera, which is his phone that he's holding up, tut-tutting at young people and telling them they need to be better or something. And then he uploaded it to whatever service. And then, so the girl, did that guy want a debate in the marketplace of ideas about what he was saying? Probably not. It's unclear why this guy did this at all. It's very strange to me. Maybe he just wanted attention, like most people online. And then the girl who's writing on her notepad is making kind of a jujitsu move of I'm not going to fight back. I'm just going to be okay, boomer, fuck off, whatever, man. And then I'm going to do my own thing. So, Plucking Heads is one place where people online can have conversations where they disagree with each other. But in most places, it's just open warfare and people yelling at each other and craziness. And so that's the world these kids grew up in. And so it's not debating on Intelligence Squared or some NPR program. It's like flame war, go, jump off a bridge. I'm going to murder your mother. This is where debates end. So I don't know.
Yeah. And look, I mean, simply as a modern version of fuck off, I actually don't really have any problem with it. It's just that when I started studying up on the issue and reading about it and asking young people about it, what I was seeing was over and over being told that this is the response that's being given to older people's rejection of younger people's demands and beliefs on these hot button issues, climate change, LGBT, especially the T now, and all of this. And that's where I sort of have a problem with it, right? Because it's not just that it's impotent, but it's also that I'm not under the impression that they've had this exhaustive argument and come to the conclusion that the old people aren't listening. My impression is that they're having the argument and they're getting pushback because a lot of people don't agree with them. And it seems to be that they're not just tolerant of, but that they're surprised by. And we weren't surprised that our elders rejected our arguments, and we weren't, it seems, as broken up by it. And maybe that's just because we didn't care as much about issues, which is certainly the case, as they do now. But it just seems to me to indicate something that, I don't know, worries me a little bit at least.
Yeah, so. I can't say. So let's leave that as being the last word, unless there's anything else you want to add.
No, that's it, Aria, and I appreciate you talking with me about it.
Okay, so thank you, Dan. Thank you to all of the boomers, and apologies if we offended you by characterizing you in a negative way, or presenting you as uninformed or delusional or suffering from brain damage or whatever it is.
What have you got coming up, Aria? I always think that we should be telling people what's coming.
What do you have coming? Nothing immediately in the pipeline. I have recently, I'll tease a possibility. Recently finished reading a book by a person who works for the New York Times opinion page about a controversial subject, and hope to have her on the site, but it may fall through. We'll have to see. And then I have a couple other book ones I need to make my way through that hopefully can come together. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm always open to suggestions, and if people in the comments want to suggest things or send me or tweet at me things that they think.
I've got one already in the can that I did with Robert Gressis on epistemology, and specifically sort of the epistemology of disagreement, which is relevant to what we're talking about today. And I've got one coming next week that I'm going to do with Massimo. Massimo wrote an essay he was pretty provocative about whether or not philosophers actually have expertise in anything, and specifically whether ethicists have any expertise with respect to being good. And Massimo thinks they do, and I was very, very skeptical. And so we got into a little bit of a Twitter argument, and Massimo's like, well, let's debate it on Blindhead. So that's going to be recorded next week.
Okay, well, that's how it should be. And, if the old man with the white goatee or the young, the 16-year-old girl.
Talk to Aria. He knows where to find you, right?
Yeah, or if any of you are out there and want to come on, we'd be happy to have you. And you can give your point of view and maybe get some pushback. Okay. So thanks, Dan. Thanks to our viewers and listeners, and we'll see you again next time.
Nice talking to you, Aria.